Welcome to onlySlams. To guide you through the French Open, here are Gregg and Glenn Clark.
Well, one more of these to wrap up the French Open, and then we take like a 5-day break or something like that, and then we'll have another Grand Slam to guide everyone through. But one more French Open Roland Garros episode of onlySlams.
Love.
We start Gregg Rosenthal with, I think it's not wildly unexpected, but I think we could say it's still unexpected. This was presumed to be a coronation for Rafael Nadal, and Novak Djokovic got in the way of that being the case and took him out in a thriller on Friday that, admittedly, I'm a little bit bummed that Nadal didn't have it in him after the third set. It was so good for 3 sets that you genuinely thought you might be watching something that was going to be eternal, and it was still a great tennis match. But, man, I was really hoping that Nadal had 2 more sets in him.
I think it will be eternal, at least or immortal for Djokovic. He said it after the semifinal that it was one of the 3 best matches. I like that he knew what the 3 were. I wish someone followed up. I'm sure the U.S. Open, one of the U.S. Open semis against Djokovic is in there. Against Federer is in there. But it was one of the 3 best matches he ever had. His best match at Roland Garros at this point in their careers to beat Nadal in that high level. The third set to me was as good a level on clay. It was just kind of perfection. You couldn't have topped that. And to me, maybe it's the pandemic, maybe it's something else that I didn't need the 4th and the 5th to be magical or whatever. The fact that they gave us that brilliance for that set was awesome. And Djokovic made it count on Sunday. I do think that got lost in it. And I was a little worried about Djokovic coming out of that. Is he going to be able to turn around and have it? Because if he loses in the finals, I don't think that match is that memorable or meaningful. I mean, we'd remember it, but ultimately, like, how many people talk about the Nadal Djokovic quarterfinal? I believe it was in 2015. No, they don't. They talk about the Wawrinka Djokovic final, which is actually my favorite men's final at the French of all time. Even though I think it was only 4 sets.
Yeah.
But the tennis was outrageous. Stan was so much fun to watch. It was so good that might have been my favorite final. And for a while on Sunday, it looked like Tsitsipas was going to ruin it.
Well, it's funny. I thought on Friday that I thought Tsitsipas had the edge going into Sunday because of all the things that you laid out, that having to climb that mountain, and a lot of people pointed out that Tsitsipas, it felt like afterwards, his emotion afterwards on Friday made it seem like he had already climbed his mountain just by getting there. But
yep,
obviously
he played 5 sets too.
Correct,
to be sure,
and was spent and was a wreck afterwards. Just having finally made a final. I think to some extent you're right. I do think that just getting a second win over Nadal in Paris would have been so ridiculous. And in shaping this argument, all this absurd, that we engage in because we engage in it, this GOAT conversation, being the man that beat Rafael Nadal twice in Paris and no one else, only one other person ever done it once, I think alone would have stood as very significant. Yes, backing it up and more becoming the first ever player to have won, twice over the career Grand Slam. It really, to me, Greg, I hate being that guy, but it shuts the door on the conversation. There is no argument to me anymore for anyone else as being the greatest tennis player of all time. I can't fathom what the argument would be for any of these other guys that wouldn't be outweighed by all of Novak Djokovic's accomplishments.
Well, here's the argument, which is why, I think it's worked the other way for Novak as he's been building up, is they're not over. And I do hate like saying these definitive things, like they're not done. It has been my belief for a while, and I think this is pretty commonly held inside, for people that really watch the sport, that Novak was going to end up with all the numbers anyways.
Right.
But this was the weekend, I think, that reality started to hit the more casual fan, the broader masses, and maybe the Nadal and Federer fans that have been in denial that this was coming.
Yeah,
because it's here. The flip between Nadal being 3 up and now it's only 1 up, in Grand Slams is huge, because Nadal trying to get one anywhere else is going to be hard. And by the way, every other type of measurement you want to do, time at number 1, Masters series, head to head, different things like that, Djokovic looks even better in those.
And that's to me why the slam total didn't really mean as much. Like, I never was caught up in he had to have the slam record before we could declare him the greatest player of all time. We had so many other measurements that you bring up. He has every head-to-head.
Only by a couple against Nadal, but
that's fine. But against every play, all of the great players now in 2 different generations, he has every head-to-head.
Well,
That's
and I think
insane. And yes, maybe some of the new guys will ultimately end up passing him. Like, it's possible that if
probably not
playing, but I'm with you. I don't think they will. I think that he will go down to having head-to-head advantages over the top 3 players in one generation and the top 3 players in the next generation.
And the way he did it, I think, points out the way that he's gotten here, that he just feels like rooting against Michael Jordan. I hate to sound like too sports talk radio-y, but I was, a Celtics fan growing up, so I just couldn't get myself to like Michael
I was just
Jordan
an anti-Michael Jordan guy. I really, right. I think because my father grew up with Maryland and Len Bias and the Carolina thing, like, it was just ingrained in me to root against Michael Jordan.
And the Celtics were on the other side of being a great franchise, and I couldn't get myself to ever want Michael Jordan to win. And picking, rooting against him just felt so fruitless. And I've done that so much with Djokovic. And there was like a couple weeks, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, where or maybe a year ago, I came around and just sort of was like understanding and recognizing his greatness. But it didn't feel good. I went back to rooting against him, and it's pointless. But watching that final on Sunday, he had a quote that said, "Once I got up a break in the third, I felt pretty good about where I was. I felt like I was going to win."
Right. Down 2 sets. He just
in a Grand Slam final. But everyone watching, I think I did too. 100%. He's mentally on another planet, that he could play tennis that way, that you'd be down 2 sets and you get 1 break to start the third. He just said, I wanted to compete in the third. And I thought, once I got a break, I felt like I was in pretty good position. It's crazy. It just is inevitable. The mental tenacity he has is just ferocious. I've never seen anything like it when it comes in tennis.
I think there's nothing wrong, and particularly for the Federer fans, and it's a tough thing. I love Roger Federer. I adore Roger Federer. I wish so desperately that more athletes could be the gentleman, the steward of goodness that Roger Federer has been. And I think there's a way of saying it, which is that Roger Federer raised the level of tennis in a way that no player had ever raised it before. Like, there's nothing that compares to what Roger Federer did to the sport at the time. But we can't pretend, and just for the sake of wanting to love Roger Federer, like there's any word. I had somebody try it at a Federer.
We shouldn't pretend like there's some big gap either. Ultimately, it's like we're a bunch of dorks counting numbers, and you're right. Like, Djokovic's numbers are going to be like 3% better than Federer's, or 6% better. Right. It's still Federer put up all these Grand Slams. Federer had all those weeks at number 1. Federer had some big time wins. But so it's not like, let's not.
But I do think
separate these 3.
Like, I can't separate. I understand what you're saying. I still can't separate the fact, and just acknowledging cold hard facts. And I'm not a Djokovic guy. I mean, like, I struggle with him the way that everybody else struggles with him. But we have to acknowledge he did this against them. He didn't do it against David Nalbandian. He didn't do it against Juan Carlos Ferrero. He didn't do it against. He did it against them.
Right. And part of the argument was like they were older at the time, but it's like, hey, Djokovic is 34 right now. This matchup against Tsitsipas was I think they said the 6th biggest age gap in Grand Slam history. And
correct.
So Djokovic is now doing it at those ages. You were saying, well, it's unfair. He was younger than Federer at the time. It's like, no, he's still doing it.
This started 10 years ago when Roger Federer wasn't even 30 yet. That's when this started, that Novak Djokovic took over. I love Roger Federer. I adore Roger Federer. He's one of the greatest athletes I've ever seen in my life. But I think the evidence is not overwhelming.
Let's not put too much pity on him. You make him sound like you like it.
No, I feel bad for Federer fans. I do.
Because then get over yourself.
No, because I
had a lot of fun.
That's true. The reason why I feel bad for them is because I do genuinely appreciate the person that Roger Federer is.
But I also appreciate that Djokovic gives a different vibe. Like the whole gentlemanly thing, like that's who Federer was.
Yeah.
But it's like, that's not necessarily what I want out of every top tennis player.
Okay. I mean, I don't need it. Look, I was obsessed with Andre Agassi. Trust me. Yeah. I want that. But I love, as an adult, as a human, as a father, I wish we had more humans in the world that were like Roger Federer. And it would be neat if a really quality human could also be that not all of the greatest athletes of all time have to be Michael Jordan and have to be a-holes for the sake of being a-holes. You know what I mean? Like, I like the idea of someone who's just a great human also being a cerebral, all-time great. Unfortunately, Roger Federer is not going to end up being that in the sport of tennis.
I mean, he'll be one of
them.
He'll never be forgotten. And in that way. But the reason I loved him is not that. It's because he was box office, because he's fun to watch.
Yeah.
Because he hits shots that are outrageous. And Djokovic is never going to have that. He is such a more mechanical
machine. Yeah, he's a machine.
He is like the Matrix that you can't get through. He's so good defensively. He's so smart. When he really locks down, especially on clay, but really on hard courts too, like, you just can't get the ball past him, and then he moves you around, and ultimately, he wears you down. But that doesn't mean he's as exciting as Nadal or especially Federer.
He's inevitable.
To watch. And that's what I like in sports is like, I like quarterbacks that are more exciting to watch, even if they're not as good as others. So he's there, and who knows? We got the grass coming up, but it's like Tsitsipas, is very fun to watch, but is not at the place mentally where he is ready to close out these tournaments. And to be fair, Djokovic and most other greats had their times like that too. Djokovic famously was, other than his first Grand Slam, would duck out of retire out of these tournaments, was famous for not being able to close and not being a good sport and not being strong mentally, until one day he wasn't, and then he was
I think there's two things that jump out at me, Greg. One, the comparison between Djokovic and Thanos has been made quite a bit. Like, I feel it. It's just inevitable. I completely get that. And then I think this is better than it's more good than bad for Tsitsipas. I think it was a really big deal for him to finally win a semifinal, for him to finally get through and get there. And yes, it will sting for him to have lost, and for him to have lost the way that he did. But I think he sets himself up to be clay court dominant for some time to come. I'm not saying, he's going to win 13 French Open titles. Let's not kid ourselves. But I think he's going to be dominant on clay for a long time to come. And we've seen he's plenty capable enough on the other surfaces that I think this is more of a positive than a negative for Tsitsipas.
Yeah, his serve wasn't there for him after the first two sets. I thought he grew up on clay, and I get it. He slides, he plays beautifully, but his game should translate perfectly, as well or better, to grass and hard court. So he's going to be there every major, I think, moving forward. Like, he is a big time factor. He's the real deal. To me, him and Medvedev are much more the real deal than Thiem and Zverev. But when you were watching the semi between Tsitsipas and Zverev, it's like neither one of those guys are ready to close that match.
No,
it was not good at the end. But
that did seem to me, that seemed like nerves to me more than,
right, that's really what I mean. But it's been a thing with Tsitsipas at the end of these tournaments. Again, it's very common. He is younger than a lot of than even some of his generation. He's only 22. He was the youngest French finalist since Nadal. So he's got time to work his way into it. But I watched that Barcelona final where he had match points against Nadal and didn't close that either. So he had the famous Australian Open match where he had like 7 match points. He didn't close it out. So it's a thing. It's a little bit of a thing, and it's a little bit of a concern if you're in teams.
I don't disagree, but I think he's going to get there. And then maybe a thought on Nadal. I think there are a lot of people that are trying to over dramatize the fourth set and pretend like, or even when the mini break in the tiebreaker, I've heard a lot of people say, I think this was the changing of the guard. This was the end of the era or something like that. I don't think he'll be able to make a run to the final at Wimbledon, but I would not be stunned at all as long as his foot's good, that he's right back in contention in New York, where he's been unbelievably good for a very long time.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think as you get older, the concern is that you're going to get a little tighter in big spots. What it means, and it ends up showing a little bit. And that hasn't been the case for him at all. Really. Yep. I mean, here and there, he's Djokovic is a little more consistent in that way, but you're comparing him to probably the greatest ever mentally. And so, but those 2 misses that he brought up in the post, the double fault and the missed volley he also had in the tiebreaker. The double fault was in the 6-5 game, I think. And those were tight moments. Mm-hmm. And we've seen Fed have those moments certainly later in his career. And
Wimbledon final in 2019.
One thing you just worry about is just Nadal is used to being stronger physically at the end of all these matches. And, I don't know if that for the first time in ever, maybe it's like, that wasn't necessarily the case here. He seemed to definitely be taking on some pounding as the course of this tournament went on. He was fading a little bit.
There's no doubt. All right. Now you and I have to handle something.
15.
Oh.
This was inevitable. We dodged it a little bit throughout the fortnight, but we have to address it. I did not know that you were a complete psychopath. I thought that you just sort of danced with your psychosis. There is, and I know Ben Rothenberg is like the leader of this charge. There is absolutely no need whatsoever for slams to go to 3 sets. I appreciate there being events that are 3 sets. As I told you,
every other event.
Yeah, all the other events, correct. I appreciate the fact that the Olympics provide us sort of like a 3-set major, which I like a lot. The magic of 5 sets, the magic of dive in. We're doing this all day. Dive in. These are 2 absolute warriors that are going to give us a level of entertainment that is unparalleled in sport. Taking that away is insane to me. Why in the world would you want to ruin those moments?
I don't think it would be taking them away. That basically says you don't get them in women's tennis, then that you somehow need 5 sets for them.
No, you accept what it is. Like that is as much as it can be. I've seen it the other way. I know it can be done this way.
To me, I don't like that it becomes a war of attrition. That's my number one thing. That Djokovic ultimately, and Nadal, in France, that the sport is less about how high a level can you play the sport and more like, can you outlast the other person in terms of your physical and mental endurance? There is something to that. I think tennis gives you that anyways. I mean, they just played, I forget where it was, a 3-hour and 20-minute 3-set final. Like that's, to me, that's enough. So that's number one. And then number 2, just as a product, I think it's much better if it's not lasting 4 to 5 hours. Like tennis already has so many problems of scheduling, of knowing when players are going to play, of it taking the whole day, who has time to watch all this necessarily, that having a little harder cap, that it's closer to 2 to 3 hours, 1 to 3 hours, makes way more sense to me as like a sporting event that I want to watch.
What are the most famous tennis matches ever to the casual sports fan?
I mean, they're these 5-set epics.
That's what they are. That's what draws in the casual fan.
It would be like that the Nadal Djokovic match, I think, is a good example. Like, they both had all the juice that was possible for 3 sets. They didn't really have it after that. It wasn't, after that, it wasn't anticlimactic.
Nadal didn't. Yeah.
Of course, like, if it is 3 sets, that also changes these matches. I don't think that Djokovic would go down 2 sets to Musetti. Like, the whole match is different. Zverev doesn't go down 2 sets to Otto in the first round. So everything is different, but I like that. I like adding a little bit more of an immediacy. What I don't like sometimes in the 5-set matches are these tense moments at 4-4 in the first set. And then you're feeling like, you got another 3 hours to go. Like, it takes away the tension from the second in the first and the second set. Like, you felt Tsitsipas had to get that first set or else he just wasn't going to win. But even after he got it, you're like, well, we'll see if that matters or not.
100% we'll see if it matters. And this is, to me, please tell me I've got 3 more hours of this ahead of me. Please tell me, if this is what I'm getting right now, that I get to do this for the rest of my day. I get
it, but there's all these, that's fine in the finals and stuff, but it's like, there's all these other players and there's all these other rounds. I know people that are against it are so against it, and I never expect that this will ever change, but I really think it could help. It would help the sport too.
I would never feel strongly about other tournaments going to 5 sets, right? Like, it is perfection to me. And somebody would say, well, that's just because it's what and sure, it has something to do with it. It's the evidence that I have is what I have is
because the human body is not like built to play that often, and you have the every other day in the Grand Slam that you just wouldn't have any other week.
But the reward is this, like, immortality, if you will. The reward is you are the champion of champions. We elevate you in a way that is so much more significant for being able to do this, that it can't.
To me, I don't think of them any different if they won 3 out of 5 or 2 out of 3 in terms of like their greatness.
I mean, at this point, I absolutely do. I 1000% think of it.
But that's, to me, that's saying somehow it's just a different. I mean, to me, it'd be like if the NFL played an extra quarter in the postseason, or if boxing for the championship round, matches like what
boxing matches,
rounds.
But they do. I mean, like championship boxing matches are longer. Championship fights are longer.
Or if you just, but it's longer by so much too. It's potentially
longer by a significant amount more. I mean, it does work.
Just 3 to 5 is a big jump. So that's all. But it's not like it ruins my enjoyment of the match by any means. I like the 5-setters too. Fine.
I watched 5 hours of tennis on Friday. I watched 8 hours of tennis, whatever it ended up being, and I was distraught that I didn't have 2 more hours to get to watch. You
can't tell me during these Zverev matches late in Grand Slams that we need more of them. That's
because we don't like Zverev. Come on, man.
Let's soak this in. He goes up 2 sets to against Team at the U.S. Open, and it's just like, no, let's get to the good stuff. It's kind of like, let's get to the tense part faster.
I think it's all tense, and I think it's all wonderful, and I care about to me. This does go back to like people that complain that you can all you need to do when you're watching an NBA game is watch the final 5 minutes. Like, yeah, I guess that's true. That's when you find out what the result was, but there are a lot of us that really genuinely love the sport. Like, we really genuinely love the product.
Right. I of course I do, but I love women's tennis as much or more than the men's. And they show me that it's all there in the 2 out of 3 set format. Like, and to me, that makes it a better product. And it does make, I think, the Masters, weeks and stuff like that sometimes are, better products. Very often the quality of the actual tennis, what you're saying is the thing that you love, is higher because they're not out there for 4 hours just trying not to get injured, basically.
I understand what you're saying, but I also think that it lessens the other tournaments. Like, it's to me, why do I care who wins in Toronto if they're just doing the same thing that they do at a major championship? If it's the exact same thing,
It's how
And
every sport is. And no other sport just like changes the rules for the big event except
I mean,
men's tennis.
that's not really true. I mean, like they play courses at the U.S. Open. They would never play on the PGA Tour in a regular.
I know, but they don't start playing like 36 holes every day to see who can like last the longest without,
they might want to think about that. It might make me more inclined to watch, Greg. I might be more inclined.
This is silly. We can't have this argument every time. And I know I do. It's not a popular stance for whatever reason, but it really does come from my love of the sport. It really does. It's a tough thing to bring newcomers into the sport when it's like 6 hours long.
You say that, except for the fact that that's when the most casual fans are paying attention.
Yeah, unfortunately, to the fourth set, it's like.
Except, unfortunately, sometimes they pay attention and it's Isner Mahut, and you're like, "This is not tennis, please. This is not. Don't think this is what it is." All right, I hit the sounder early, but we can move on. Let's go to the women's side, and just like we all called ahead of time, Barbora Krejcikova, who I definitely knew who she was before the French Open began. I totally was familiar with her and her work. I didn't just learn about her a week ago. Definitely not a thing whatsoever. Is your French Open champion. And you alluded to nerves earlier. I don't know that it felt like the quarterfinals to the final was a display of players that were losing their nerve. And she just happened to be the one that could hang in there and grind her way through as everyone else lost their nerve.
Yeah, here and there, I think that's right.
I thought Sakari absolutely lost her nerve.
Right. I was just gonna say that's the moment that to me was the match of the tournament, because I think Sakari was, probably was playing the best of anyone in the tournament, and couldn't close it out. And really, that whole semifinal match was patchy from her, and Krejcikova a little bit too in that match. I thought she was much better in the final overall. And yeah, Sakari served for it at 6-5. That it was a fun end to that match ultimately. But you're right, it was about a bunch of players who had not been in that spot, navigating it, some better than others. Like the Rybakina Pavlyuchenkova quarter to me was great. I think they both played at a really high level. They were whacking the ball. That thing goes to 9-7 in the fifth. The Krejcikova Sakari match kind of takes that sort of path. I mean, there were these well played matches, but it's not going to be like a run that people remember necessarily of like all those matches of Krejcikova, because even as it was happening, even among these 8 women who were like surprises to make it that far, she was under the radar, even
still somehow an afterthought, right? An afterthought amongst afterthoughts.
But she was impressive. I mean, ultimately she got it done. She was down match point in the semis. She hits she plays a perfect point, including a swinging backhand volley as she's coming up to the net. And I think it sort of outlined that she plays tennis a little differently than most people do, which is as someone who is awesome at the net. And it's like, it's all the announcers ever talk about. It's like, why don't I come to the net more? And she very much is lights out when she's at the net. Doesn't mean she goes all the time, because in singles it still just doesn't make sense. But it really struck me on that match point. Who else is taking a full swinging backhand volley, nails it, and then plays great the next 3 games and wins?
I can't figure out, Greg, whether I think she's like a factor now, or whether it was just 2 weeks where everything kind of came together. I have no sense of that.
There's no way, because the number one X factor of that is how can you handle success? How can you handle winning a tournament like this? And we've seen this with countless tennis players over the years. And even the greats usually have some sort of struggle with it. It's just they usually recover. After, in some, it's just hard. It's hard to back it up.
Well, how many years was it for Novak between him winning his first Australian and then it was like 3 years, wasn't it? Something like that.
At least, yeah. I mean, he was, I think, 19 off the top of my head when he won. So, but yeah, he had a while and he had some pretty big meltdowns. And we've seen even just winning a Masters can mess you up. Like, Hurkacz's won. And hasn't won a match since. Team has not done anything since
winning the US Open.
He's kind of fallen apart. Naomi has won 2 straight twice, and then both times after winning the 2 straight, things have popped up. So it's a lot to deal with, but I do think it can't hurt her that she's been in all these Grand Slam finals as a doubles player, and that she won another one. Oh, by the way, in France. That's amazing. That's pretty amazing.
I felt really bad because I don't want to say I was rooting against her. I wasn't rooting against. By the time I got to the final, it was no different. But the story to me is always like
I was rooting kind of against her because she was a little more boring on paper than the others.
Right. It's a little bit of that.
That's not fair. It's totally unfair.
It's utterly unfair, and it's more.
She's not boring either. Like her story is amazing.
She's bold, and it's a great story. It's the whole thing. I'm rooting for the sport, and I'm rooting for the sport to get more attention. I'm rooting for excuses to talk about the sport in my life, and there's not a person in my life that wanted to talk to me about Barbora Krejcikova, and that's not her fault. Let me make that very clear. It's really cool. I did have somebody who was like, wow, she really won both the singles and the doubles, and I was like, oh, thank God somebody wants to talk about this. But I did find myself like rooting against her because I kept thinking to myself, like, Sakkari could be a great story. Like, obviously Paula Badosa is the greatest player in the history of tennis, as we've covered on this show. Like, there were so many things that I was convincing myself like could be a story, the way that none of us knew much of anything at all about Swiatek before the French Open last year. But we didn't feel as though it was that. And we felt like this was a declarative statement about a player who was about to be a factor for a very long time.
Yeah.
And there was a conversation to be had about it. And we just don't find ourselves feeling the same way right now, which is
it gets to what you like in sports. And, as I get older, I think it's like you start worrying a little less about, well, if this is going to interest anyone else or not, or whatever, am I going to enjoy watching this? And, I've had French Open finals that I've enjoyed watching more, certainly, probably most of them, but I've also had some that I've enjoyed watching less. So this is how it happens. And I was rooting for Pavs just because I'm more familiar with her.
Right.
She's been around for a while. She's been kind of a good value add as someone who's been in there and is in these good third, fourth quarter matches, and she hits a beautiful, heavy flat ball, and just, she's got the firepower, and so you almost feel like these things should be earned, but you know what? That's just not how it works, especially on the women's side. There's so many women who have incredible resumes who have not won a Grand Slam.
That's a great point. Oh, it's a great point.
And sometimes never do. Well, like Wozniacki eventually did, and men too. I mean,
it took Simona Halep a while, like
Nishikori's been to 9 quarters. He only sniffed winning one,
but
he didn't even come close.
Different competing in this era on the men's side, right? Like,
sure, but that's partly the era, and that's the thing. But there's been some. Pliskova has not won a Grand Slam yet.
Yep.
She's been in the top 10 for like 5 years now. So it's like, imagine being her watching this and being like, what the fuck?
Right. And yet we had a Roberta Vinci Flavia Pennetta Grand Slam final at one point. Like we had a Sloane Stephens Madison Keys Grand Slam final, and there are still all these players that haven't figured out a way to break through. We've had but just those 3 that I brought up, those got to be 3 of the most random Grand Slam finals that we could have possibly had between Pennetta Vinci.
Oh, yeah, there's more. I mean, Bondrosova made a final. It's like,
on both sides, when 2 completely random players both end up making a slam final. In the last 5 years, we've seen 3 of these utterly.
Although nothing like this. I mean, Keys and Sloane were both big time.
Yeah, they were players that were thought
always and had some major results. And this was number 32 versus number 33. Pennetta Vinci is right there.
It was
with
pretty friggin' random.
That's the same. Yeah. That's the same.
But at least like they were both veteran players who had done some. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't a double specialist making a final.
But to me, this is. You either got to embrace it or not. And one of the things I love how the rhythm of the tennis season for a fan, and I hope if people keep listening to this, show will, start to think about that, is it's just so different than team sports. It's like Federer's already played in Germany this week. Like
had to play a pretty grueling match.
Right. The tournament, the next tournaments always start, and you get to just like start over. And yes, Grand Slams, especially on the men's side, they feel like they're earned and you have to take these steps and stuff, but it doesn't have to be like that. Every time it's just a total start over. And I made that big draw sheet up. And at the end, it was Pavlyuchenkova and Krejcikova.
I mean, you were right. By the way, you were right.
You can make it the greatest moment in your life. Any week, anyone can have that.
A great point. Great point. All right, let's wrap it up.
40 love.
So just some potpourri. I want to throw out. I have always been tough on the Tennis Channel over the years, right? I have been very tough on them because at times it has come off extraordinarily low rent. Like, watch the Tennis Channel versus watching the Golf Channel, right? And it like you feel like you're watching a cable access sometimes. Now,
that's harsh.
Some of that's the graphics, some of that's the nature of, hey, this sport happens in America, this sport happens all over the world. We are limited in what we're able to do in going and covering the sport the way that this other one does. So I understand that some of that is inherent. I thought this was the moment for the Tennis Channel over the course of the last 2 weeks, and particularly on Friday with this, unbelievable match that's unfolding. I don't know that there are enough greater than signs in the world to explain how I thought much better their coverage was than NBC's coverage. Now, part of that I didn't realize at the time was NBC not being on location, which is bat-ass bonkers to me that NBC wouldn't be on location for the French Open finals. That's I don't have the words to describe that. That's crazy to me. I thought Jason Goodall was I like Jason Goodall, right? But he's always sort of been like the other guy in ESPN's coverage. Him taking charge on the call of that match on Friday was, spectacular. He commanded the moment, understood it. I've never he's been a guy I've never spent that much time thinking about over the years. He was wonderful. I thought this was an incredible 2 weeks with the Tennis Channel, and I've not been much of one to praise them over the years, and I can't say enough about how much I enjoyed their coverage and how heartbreaking it was for me that I had to turn to NBA. And I like Dan Hicks, I like Mary Carrillo, and McEnroe, right? Like, it's not a knock on them. I don't like Dan Hicks as much as I like Ted Robinson, but he's a solid broadcaster. I could not tell you how much I was disappointed that Tennis Channel didn't have the finals over the weekend because I thought they were that good.
NBC acts like they don't like tennis.
Yep.
The Nadal Djokovic semifinal was on in that third set on NBC out here on the West Coast. Do you know at what point in the match they were during that third set?
Oh, did they put it on tape delay?
It was on tape delay.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
3 hours behind. They were showing Zverev Tsitsipas at the beginning of that match. And then it's hilarious. As that tiebreaker is happening, I flipped over just to see at NBC, and it was 3-0 Nadal. I was like, hey, it's like you're actively trying to hurt the sport. The sport is literally on live, the biggest match, the best match of the entire year. You have the coverage. You've gotten through it's like, hey, they got the Today Show. Don't want to move the Today Show. The Today Show's over. Right. You're into your coverage. You have made the decision to instead play something that happened hours ago because you're worried about not filling the space. Fill it up later. It's crazy. They had it on NBC Sports Channel, right, but that channel's going away. I don't agree with you on. I haven't been as harsh about the Tennis Channel because ultimately I just want to see tennis. And
I get that. And when I say what I say, it's more to me a direct comparison to golf. It's really tough, right? I'm jealous.
Okay, I don't watch golf ever.
Well, I don't, but I have to sometimes, and so I'm jealous of how good golf fans have it because Golf Channel looks like ESPN.
Well, to your point, Tennis Channel's gotten a lot better the last couple of years, and they've gotten more live coverage the last 3 years. And the difference is their announcers and everyone working there follows tennis every week. And John McEnroe does not follow tennis every week.
No. Now, that being said, John McEnroe doesn't detract from me in big U.S. Open matches. He doesn't take anything away from me.
Right, but he does for me on the women.
Okay.
He does for me on both, but really on the women because his lack of the basics of who these players are and what they do is pretty outrageous. But Mary Carrillo is so awesome; she almost makes up for it. But just take him off the women. It's like he doesn't know these
right.
players.
He's not following. Yeah.
But the tape delay stuff is crazy. I mean, it's crazy, and it makes it hard. It makes it hard to. You really want to be able to reach as many people as possible. I saw something, and it's on No Challenges Remaining, that it's like this French Open is the only tournament in Greece that's on non-pay TV. So every single Zachary match and Tsitsipas matches on, and that's huge. Like,
yep.
And this is NBC is one of the only times it's on broadcast.
Yep.
Television.
No, it's
literally
over.
have the match of the year, and you're not even showing it. It is legitimate West Coast, East Coast bias. I mean, people want to say like that's real or not real.
Oh, I remember living in Arizona.
Example.
You know, before the Tennis Channel had the coverage, like I remember living in Arizona and like realizing there was just no way for me to be able to watch. I mean, this is in the mid 2000s. Like this is
right. Desperate people like me are gonna either find a stream if it's not the French Open, or watch on find out where it is. But the average fan just flipping is going to flip to it and be like, oh, wait, it's not on live. I'm not going to watch this.
I'm good. Yeah, no doubt. I did get good news. My friend Pam Shriver told me this morning, ESPN's crew is going to Wimbledon, which is very good news for me. It's just, there's no comparison between announcers that are there and have the feel for the moment versus, I think there are people that are doing as best as they possibly can and calling sports from home. There is no comparison between the two. The
NBA was tough. The NBA first round of the playoffs was tough.
Brutal.
It's not the officials. I mean, the broadcasters.
No, it's not on them. They're doing everything they can possibly do, but it is just not the same. And so I was very happy to learn that the ESPN crew will be at Wimbledon. Apparently, we're going to learn on Wednesday what the fan situation will be for Wimbledon. That's when they're going to make an announcement. There continues to be a belief that there will be at least some fans in attendance. And I'm okay with that because I just need anything that creates an atmosphere. There were 5,000 people there for the French Open, and it
sounded louder.
Oh my God.
I think this is happening with live sports, that everyone is so happy to be back.
Yeah.
And enjoy the moment that you can't. I know Phoenix's fans would have been crazy in any NBA playoff situation, but they're like another level right now.
No doubt. Nuts.
They're crazy. Nuts. And the Djokovic Nadal match and the final was just awesome. My sensations were nourished, to use
I completely agree. I did not feel, at no point did I feel like this isn't a full crowd. This isn't. I
didn't know that. I assumed it was full until I saw afterwards.
But it was really weird the way they did it too, because they were like, you would look up and there was nobody up top.
Right.
They had fewer people in, and they just didn't seem like they were doing much in the way of distancing of the people that were in there. They were sort of like, you're in, so everyone. You would look down and like the lower bowl was almost entirely full, and then there was just nobody up top. But that will be, that would be much welcome to just have any sort of spectator presence at Wimbledon.
Although it has to be said, if we're ranking crowds, which I'm going to, Grand Slam crowds, this is a tough one. Wimbledon is last. That's the easy part.
but that's the nature of the event and what they want, and that's just the way that it goes.
That's silly. I'm struggling. I'll have to think about
New York.
The other three.
There is nothing in the world that compares to a night match, a night match that matters in New York. And it's tough because there's now a generation of people that don't know this, but a night match involving an American that people care about in New York, there is nothing in tennis that compares to that. There's nothing.
France can be the French Open can be pretty great.
It can
have
a
sort of, and you have this at the U.S. Open, but a little less of like, you'll have different factions of different European countries, or of course, Serbs for Djokovic and all that, and then you really feel that international flavor there. I think more than Australia or the US. I give the US a slight edge.
I think we just did that. It's New York 1, Paris 2, Australia 3, Wimbledon 4.
It's close though. I have to say those three to me are very tightly bunched, and then Wimbledon's far behind them.
I mean, right, but it's what you're watching at Wimbledon. I still need there to be a reception. There need to be something. Like I'll take the polite claps.
Australia can get pretty wild too. I'm no slights to them.
So when I went to Wimbledon, I have a friend who's a former football player named Bryant McKinney, and Bryant had told me before me going, he was like, "Hey, if you want, I can try to get you some time with Venus or Serena because they've been friends for forever." And I said, "Yeah, I mean, what the hell are you talking about? Of course." But I was going on Manic Monday. And so I was like, there's just no way, right? Like, there's no way this could happen.
To interview them or like
no, not the interview,
out?
just to say hello. Just
Okay.
like, I know somebody and you can come by and you can say.
I'd almost feel more comfortable interviewing.
Oh, I almost no doubt. So we had the choice that day of going to center court or going to court 2 where Serena was playing. And I don't remember who she was playing. She ended up in a tight third set with somebody she should never have been in a tight third set with. But it was out on court 2 and she was pissed off about being there. And we decided to go to court 2, still holding up this like dream that we were going to end up getting some time with Serena. So we decided to go to court 2 that day. I forgot about and I was into it, because I love Serena. I'm obsessed with Serena. So I was fired up and I was like, oh, right, this is not the place. This is not the place to be that guy. Remarkably, as he texted me a name, he said, if you get anywhere near her camp, ask for this person. And they happened to walk because they had to go out to court 2. The match is over. They got to walk by everybody, which is why everybody hates going to court 2 at Wimbledon, is because you just have to walk through the people in order to get there. And so I yelled out this guy's name. He turns around. He's like, what? And I'm like, oh my God. And we got to say hello and nothing more than that. But we got to say hello. And that's cool. My wife and I's trip. Anything else potpourri wise that you want to cover as we wrap up?
No, I think we're good. I feel like this was a fun journey. The onlySlams French Open journey.
The plan is to do this again for Wimbledon. We'll tweak some things. I have no doubt we'll have some tweaks over we got to do another one of these in like 9 days to do a.
Yeah, I don't know. I know my Emika's like, it's one thing to hear you yelling, at the top of your lungs about the NFL. For some reason, you doing it about tennis annoys me more. So he's like, at least you don't try to talk to me about, tennis. Football. I'm always trying to get her, talking to her about tennis. So maybe, but I was like, that's what the podcast is gonna be for. I won't talk to you anymore.
Right. We got it all out of our system. We got it all out of the system. So thank you to those of you that listen, that watch, that subscribe, that liked, all those things. We'll continue to try to tweak it. And the plan is that we will keep doing it at least
figure it out. Figure it out.
Exactly. Gregg sounds way less committed than
No, that's not true. I have some ideas. I have some good ideas.
All right, very good. Gregg, thank you for doing this, man. This has been fun. I enjoyed it a great deal. All right, we'll see you guys. This has been onlySlams.